me. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out on this really awful night. I do appreciate it. I hope you didn't get too wet. I'd like to welcome everybody to the second talk in Manchester by the Sea Museum Speaker Series. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank all the people who helped to make this evening possible. Mary Minot, Sue Thompson, Matthew Swindell, our archivist, and all the board members of the Manchester by the Sea Museum. Special thanks to Nancy Klebart and the Congregational Church for allowing us to use this wonderful hall. Particular thanks to Mary Ann Coombs, who organized the space and the refreshments. So you might have been here for a month ago for Gary Gilbert's talk on mushrooms. Was anybody here the last month? Yes. Quite a few people. So you might like to know that over 90 people attended that talk. So that we express our appreciation for that. We have 3 more talks in the series. Next month, Doug Stewart will talk about the China trade and its connection to Manchester. And in May, Corey Profu, who you might know from the 1623 studios, will be our speaker to kick off our summer exhibit that's going to be called Summers by the Sea, Mascanoma Hotel and the Resort Era in Manchester. He's going to talk about the resort era movement and summer life in Manchester by the Sea, which I think will be very interesting. In June, there's going to be a members-only event at Shark's Mouth with a talk by Arthur Shercliffe on the history of the Curtis family. And you can sign up on all of these events on our website. Or better still, visit the museum in person, and please join the museum. It's great value of $60. So now Ross is going to introduce our speaker for the evening. Thank you all for coming.
Good evening, everybody. I'm the designated celebrity introducer, Rob Fitzgibbon, who comes to us by way of originally of the Rockport Quarry Fitzgibbons, and then born and raised in Wenham, and now in the Chebacco Parish in Essex. He is bringing us to the intersection of science and morality and money with the story of Graverobbing here tonight. And his story is a pretty fascinating one, and it has actually, you'd be somewhat surprised, a somewhat salacious tie to this very congregation. So Rob is an amateur historian in Essex, and you can read his blog on Medium, where he's blogged extensively about this story of the Chebacco Parish, and also another really interesting story that he's covered. He's about to come up with a book on having to do with an unsolved murder in Rockport, the murder of the president of the local church in Rockport, who was brutally beaten to death in a shop in downtown Rockport. And when a member of the congregation, a woman, came forward to give evidence that she knew who the actual killer was, before she could speak, she was found beaten to death in her home. And there's a really interesting story of money, power, and murder coming at you from that. So I encourage you to read his blog on the Medium. It's a Medium, and super interesting story. So Rob Fitzgibbon.
Just going to adjust the mic here. Hold on. All right, can everybody hear me? Okay. Thank you, Russ, for such a wonderful and heartfelt introduction. And I want to thank everyone, of course, for attending. I know that, yes, it's a gross night, but this is actually kind of a perfect night to discuss Graverobbing. Anyway, so props to the Manchester Museum for doing the speaker series. It's absolutely fantastic. Please always support your local museums and your local historical institutions. They are, it's so important to keep history alive. And again, thank you all very, very much for coming. I think I do have a slide with a picture of me. Hold on. Yes. Okay. Your host, Rob Fitzgibbon, as Russ said, I grew up in Wenham. My my professional career, I actually went to art school. I then eventually got into a career in software development as what's called a user experience designer. But I've always had a passion for history, and particularly local history. And so it was just kind of a thing where I kind of got involved into this, and all of a sudden it's become a thing. So like one thing I would like to ask you, so I do have a bunch of blog posts on Medium. You'll notice I only have 14 followers. So that's completely lame. Please go to Medium and follow me.
We could double that.
we could triple that just by all of them tonight. Yes. All right. So listen, I'm going to tell you. Okay, that's a microphone slide. Okay.
The microphone a little closer to your mouth.
Should I do it like this? Is that okay?
Not your mouth, to the microphone to your mouth.
Like that.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Okay, it's still good? Everyone can hear me? Okay. All right, thanks. Okay. I'm going to tell you a story tonight. This is a story that touches on science, on religion, on morality, on money, on class, on ambition, on slavery, and of course scandal. It's a story, of course, about the origins of the town of Essex. It's a story about the origins of the medical profession in the United States. It relates to the practice of grave robbing, or body snatching, and specifically about a gentleman named Dr. Thomas Sewall, who was the body snatcher at Chebacco Parish. And I'm also going to tell you a little bit about how his story actually relates to the town of Manchester, because there is a connection to Manchester that I suspected most of you don't know about. But it's salacious and good. And this whole story, it's like a gothic novel. It's just absolutely fantastic. And there's probably a few themes that I'm going to be stressing tonight. I'll walk you through them. The first one is that there is no such thing as the good old days. I think that there's a desire to look back, particularly on like the tri-corner hat era, and to be like, oh, everyone was so virtuous and noble, and they were like, no, they weren't. They were just humans, just like you and I. The world ran on the 7 deadly sins and the weather, just like it does today. Second thing is that I want to stress to you guys is that today's scandal is tomorrow's history. So, right now, in your head, think about a scandal happening in this local community, and just think, in 100 years, someone's going to be in this hall talking about it. Yeah. So the interesting things about that, though, is that scandals are often very difficult to document, because have you ever heard of the phrase, like, someday we'll look back on this, smile nervously, and change the subject? Yeah, that's kind of what happens when scandals happen in a small town like Essex or Manchester, what have you. So we have some information about what happened. We don't have all the information. We don't have particularly sort of information that would be critical to sort of understanding, like, what did it feel like? What was it like to sort of live through that? And I'll kind of talk about that when we get through the story. F. Scott Fitzgerald, the American writer, famously wrote in his book, The Last Tycoon, that there are no second acts in American life. And tonight's talk, I'm going to say, well, yes, there are. There can be second acts in Americans' life. It just perhaps depends on, whose life. And the last thing I want to sort of mention about sort of the theme is that kind of reminds me of the book of the movie Everything is Illuminated. It's basically this concept of like we're all interconnected. And what I found was very interesting about this story is again this interconnectedness that I found with the history of Manchester, which I will talk to you about in just a second. Anyway, so yeah, Rob Fitzgibbon lived in Wenham, the library trustee for the THOP Byrne Library in Essex. The Dr. Sewall story, I first got into it a couple of years ago, and I stand on the shoulders of Essex Historical Society and a guy named Chris Benedetto, who is a history professor at, I think, Granite State College. And anyway, the work that I've done is sort of stands on the shoulders of the work that those people have done, which is great. As Russ mentioned, I am in the final throes of editing a manuscript for publication by Arcadia Publishing. It's going to be called like Rockport's Main Street Murder, and it's about these unsolved murders in Rockport that happened in the 1930s. And One of the key things that I want to stress with that case is that it actually led to the largest mass state police hunt in history, and the killer was never found. So there we go. But let's go back to the town of Essex. Okay, I assume that all you guys are fairly familiar with the town of Essex. It's a little north of here. Originally founded in 1634. That's when the English white settlers came in. Very small. Actually, it wasn't a town. It was part of Ipswich. And I don't know, has anyone ever, like, all right, let me kind of give you like a little personal story. So when my second daughter, she had just finished getting her driver's permit, and she was supposed to like pick me up at the Ipswich train station, because I was like, I had to, basically I had to get the train in Ipswich, and anyway, she forgot. So I had to walk from the Ipswich train station all the way down to downtown Essex. And I gotta tell you, it's a real pain. It's about 6 miles in the dark. It was kind of dark. But the reason I bring that up is because that's what everybody in Chebacco back in the 1680s had to do. Ipswich was the town, and to go like on church on Sunday or like bury one of your relatives, you had to walk the 6 miles to go into downtown. So obviously, lousy commute. The Chebacco residents didn't like it. So this is sort of the origins of like why they wanted this to separate and form their own town. So from about 1673, the Chebacco residents began to petition to the Ipswich town fathers, hey, we want to have our own parish, we want to have our own minister, we want to have a, and they were like, yeah, no. So maybe probably some of you are familiar with the story of Madame Varney. Has anyone ever heard of Madame Varney? All right, yes, okay. So like Madame Varney, basically Ipswich town fathers say like no, you're not building a parish hall. Heck with that. So Madame Varney was the Chebacco resident who said because with this threat that anyone who helped build this parish hall would get excommunicated from the church. So Madame Varney got all these people from Gloucester and out of town, all these guys from out of town to come and build that parish hall. So nobody got excommunicated. Anyway, so point is, Chebacco wanted to get out from under Ipswich. But let me kind of this ties into this gentleman that I'm going to introduce you to, a guy named Thomas Sewall. Okay, so fast forward 138 years. Thomas Sewall is the son of Thomas and Priscilla Sewall. He was born in Hallowell, Maine, which is near Augusta on the Kennebec River, so way, way, way up there. In 1807, he moved to Massachusetts. He was a really bright, young, handsome. In fact, I have a photo of him. Hold on. There it is. All right, so he's a little older. But anyway, so handsome dude, very smart, wants to be a doctor, bright kid, moves to Massachusetts in 1807, and he starts attending lectures at Harvard Medical School. And so he lives kind of, I think, in town, like somewhere closer to Harvard in Boston, till about 1809. In 1809, he moves up to Essex, to Chebacco. And he moves in with a woman named Miriam Choate. And they move into this, let me show you the picture of where they moved to. So it's this house here. Okay, so this is on Spring Street in Essex. It's known as has anyone ever seen this? This is the house that's it's a house and there's a house attached to it, there's another house attached to it. It's really cool. Anyway, so it's originally known as the Pickering House because Reverend Pickering built it, but the Choate family bought it in the early 1800s. And Miriam Choate, her husband bought it, her husband died, so she had no husband. She needed someone to help take care of her kids. Thomas Sewall shows up, and hey, we'll bring him in. He'll pay room and board. He'll help teach my kids, and he's a bright guy, so he's going to teach them things like Latin and grammar and all that kind of good stuff. So it worked out great. And again, it became the beginning of a lifelong friendship that he had with the children. The oldest child was a 17-year-old girl named Mary Choate, and so he's about 21, she's 17, so what do you think happened? They got married, it's sweet, anyway, so he falls in love, and the mom's all cool with it, anyway. So in November 1813, they're married. He has just graduated from Harvard Medical School. He's just become licensed as a member of the Massachusetts Medical Society, and it's great, and he is just, let me go back to him. So the dude is thriving in Essex. He's doing great. He's married into like the Choate family. You have to understand is also it's like one of the first families of Essex. It's a family that has doctors and Revolutionary War heroes and wealthy. They own islands. He's just doing great. He's doing really well. He becomes the local parish doctor, and he also becomes the second parish treasurer around 1818. Which is interesting because at this time, again, the town the community is trying to become its own town. And that's what the big thing that's going on in 1818. Chebacco's got about 1,200 residents, so it's a tiny, tiny town, half of what the size it is now. They have their own meeting house. They have a new pastor, a guy named Reverend Robert Crowell, who he assumed the post in 1814. He eventually wrote the first history of the town of Essex. It's still, though, technically a part of Ipswich, and it's just, there's churnings of okay, we got to become independent. So Dr. Sewall, the young Dr. Sewall here, he's actually part of the committee that is investigating, basically writing the petition to the Mass legislature to become an independent town. So that's all good. What else is going on in the, say, medical profession in the United States? So when we became a young nation, the medical practice was absolutely booming. This was like a thing to do. Thousands of students wanted to be doctors, and there's all sorts of medical schools popping up. There's in Boston, Harvard Medical School. There's Dartmouth, up in Dartmouth, New Hampshire. There's Philadelphia. So all these people are wanting to study. They're wanting to study to become doctors. These new doctors are getting graduated, and they're doing things like they're becoming basically local doctors in their communities. And some of them are called, what they're doing, it's called acting as a preceptor. A preceptor is someone who's they basically offer to teach young students, give them clinical training in preparation for them to go off to medical school. It's kind of a little bit of a side gig before they actually have to go and live somewhere and go for 2 years and become a doctor. And some of these doctors, like our Dr. Sewall here, are becoming an anatomist, so someone who also sort of teaches the practice of anatomy. And again, back in this era, there's no AP biology or anything like that. This is you would have to sort of study with someone, and kind of anatomy is a thing to study. So one of the kind of side gigs Dr. Sewall is doing is that he's teaching anatomy. He's giving anatomy lectures to local students. Now, as you can imagine, if you're going to teach anatomy, probably helps to have some practice, right? Well, the thing is you can't get any practice unless you actually get some practice. But you can't. The thing is that unless you got a human body, you're not going to get a lot of practice. So who's gonna find a body for you to practice on? Well, this is where it gets into the concept of grave robbing, which actually the term grave robbing is incorrect. According to American and English jurisprudence, a dead body is not property. If you're interested in just taking the body, but not taking any of the clothes, any of the jewelry, anything like that, it's not stealing, technically. It is, however, what is known as body snatching, or in the 19th century, the popular term was resurrection man. And so, why resurrection man, and how did it become sort of a career choice for some people? Well, I guess the short answer is supply and demand. So, all right. In English and American colonial law, which is known as the Body of Liberties, no pun intended, the only legal means of obtaining a cadaver was basically was of an executed criminal, and it was only at the discretion of the sentencing judge. So the thing is that there just weren't a lot of executed criminals around to sort of practice anatomy on. Now, in Massachusetts, when dueling became a crime, slaying duelists were a potential option. But again, there's just not that many duels going on in Massachusetts to increase the supply. In 1784, the Massachusetts legislature actually had an anti-dueling law that they wrote in the books, and it specified that a county coroner was required to either bury the body of a slain duelist in a public place, without a coffin and with a stake driven through their heart, or hand them over to an anatomist for dissection. So you can see that anatomy is clearly a part and parcel of a very, very sort of shameful punishment. And, you know, why? Why is it, I mean, why is it so shameful? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is self-evident, it's icky. You know what I mean? You're going to cut someone else, there's kind of an icky factor to it. But there's also an aversion based on biblical piety. So, like, if we look back on our you know, biblical studies and we think about this during the second coming, what's going to happen is that Jesus is going to raise all the bodies from the dead. This is why, for example, in a lot of like New England churches like around here, that the bodies face eastward, because the idea is that on Judgment Day, everyone is going to rise up. So the body, you know, we're all going to rise up. Now the question is, of course, is that if you're going to rise up, you want to rise up with all your parts in the same spot, right? You don't want, you know, you don't want part of you to be in a dumpster, part of you to be in a pickle jar. So clearly, even though there's not specifically like a biblical injunction against this, the kind of theory was like, oh yeah, like cutting people up is probably not, this is not a good thing. Literally, it's barring you from getting into heaven, it's preventing you from being resurrected in the flesh. So the job is physically gross, morally repugnant, and pretty much as sacrilegious as it gets. Did that stop anyone? No! Okay. So in the late 18th century, excuse me, Harvard Medical School can only get 2 bodies a year to practice on, basically. So you have about 20, 30, 40 people gathering around these 2 bodies. And typically at the time, they basically had a 4-month lecture series. So you can imagine that you've got 2 bodies out on a table in a room like this for 4 months, and everyone just sort of crowding around. It just, yeah. So everyone wasn't, people were like, weren't getting a very good education, is basically what it boils down to. And that resulted in doctors, basically performing badly. Like they would be called to a bedside for an appendix and they'd take out a liver. So that wasn't considered very good. So anyway, so one of the things that a lot of doctors were thinking, like, why don't we go to what's called the Parish method? And the Parish method was, was being practiced in France. And the idea is that you get to have actually a body to practice on. You get to dissect your own body, and you get to you can totally study it, so you can actually learn the difference between the liver and the appendix and all that kind of stuff. Sounds like a great idea. Again, the challenge was not enough bodies to practice on. Did that stop people? No. So there's a guy named Dr. Joseph Warren, who was a Revolutionary War hero, died at the Battle of Bunker Hill. And he started a club that you probably, may still exist, and you've probably heard of it at Harvard. It's called the Spunkers Club. Has anyone ever heard of it? Ah, okay, so the Spunkers Club was a club that was, specific purpose was to snatch dead bodies for anatomy classes. It was secret, sort of semi-secret, or at least unofficial, and it definitely existed until the first decades of the 19th century. Now you have to understand that this isn't like a Sons of Anarchy, like bad boy club. This is like all the bright young things are doing it. Like the founder of the medical school, Joseph's brother John, was a founding member. Sam Adams, the patriot, his son was a founding member. William Eustis, who became the future governor of Massachusetts, he was a member. So this is all the bright young things that Harvard are all doing, is they're giving up bodies. But I guess one of the things you have to understand is that this is sort of a cusp period of history, because this is the era of the Enlightenment. And of course, you could hear someone arguing how dare, this is absolutely sacrilegious, this is terrible, how could you possibly do this to someone? And then having a doctor say, my goodness, I could save one life by practicing and knowing the difference between an appendix and a kidney. Isn't that worth it? Isn't it worth for me to know my job and so that I can save lives? So you can see this kind of arguments kind of playing out in real time, but it's still an incredibly controversial thing. Now in 1815, the Mass Legislature passes an act to protect the sepulchres of the dead. And it's the first law in the state against body snatching. So it was a felony offense. The fines were up to $1,000, imprisonment up for a year, and even you get a public whipping, maybe. Now you understand that it's about 15,000 New England people were being educated as doctors. It's about 150 a year or whatever. They need bodies to practice on. A lot of doctors, a lot of bodies. So this comes, I wanted to do, if you guys are willing, I wanted to do a little interactive part of this evening's entertainment. Because, like, you know, if you're going to dig up a body, what is the best way to do it? And I have found out what the best way is, and I did not make this up. This is actually from sources from a book called Graverobbing in New England, which was written by a Dr. Frederick Waite in 1945. He was a professor of embryology and histology at Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Of course, I have to say, kids, please don't try this at home. I do want to stress that being a successful resurrection man requires a certain technique. I'm going to teach you the technique, and if followed carefully, the chance of detection or capture are slim. Now, I need 2 volunteers. Is anyone willing to be a volunteer? Russ. All right. I got my first. Okay, I'm gonna step away from the mic here. I got my first volunteer, Russ. Thank you. All right, come on up. Come on up. You're my first volunteer. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. The grave. Okay. Now, as I said, typically resurrection men work in teams of 3. So you want to select accomplices that are able-bodied and can do a burst of physical activity quickly. So with a practice team, you can get a body up and out of the ground and out of the graveyard in less than an hour. So that's what we're going to do. You excited? Excited. All right, let's do this. Now, what's a precondition? What's something we need first? The first thing we need somebody who needs a body. Okay, so like. In about 1840, I don't have numbers for the 1818 period, but in 1842, a body you could sell a body for about $25, which is about $750 in $24. So that's the going price, something like that. So let's assume that we have discovered we have a client, if you will. So what's the next thing we need to do? We need to find a dying person. Okay. So, like, you need to know someone who's dying or someone who has an advanced knowledge of an upcoming burial. Obviously, if you're a doctor, this is probably pretty easy to sort of know. You know, at the time for body snatchers, you don't need to be picky. Like most kind of students that are studying anatomy, they're not specializing in any sort of pathology. You know, so they just need practice. So it doesn't sort of matter. Now, the next thing that we're going to do, you guys ready? We're going to reconnoiter the territory, all right? So you have to find a burial spot. You got to find somewhere that's not too sort of downtown. There's not a lot of kind of people around, all that kind of stuff. Something with some good concealment of trees. That's great. So once we do that, we have to locate the grave of the subject. And my colleague here, Russ, has actually gone to the interment ceremony, and he noticed the person was being buried and all that kind of stuff. That's good. So we know where the grave is. We then need to do is we need to choose a date and a time for the resurrection. Okay, so resurrections can be done all throughout the year, except for like the hottest months and the most cold months. Now the hottest months are because like the body obviously rots quicker. The coldest months, of course, is because it's harder to sort of dig them up out of the ground. But one of the things that you have to do, if you're a resurrection man, you have to plan your activities around the college medical schools curriculum, basically. So they're doing their anatomy sessions between November and February. So that's when we're going to go get our body. Now, so you obviously you got to go to the graveyard, but no one's around. One of the key things. Now, don't worry, I will be giving you tasks in just a second. Okay? So, good equipment always makes great memories. So we have fortunately brought good equipment on our little excursions tonight. What are the things that you might kind of like think about being good equipment? A conveyance. We need some sort of wagon with a horse or a donkey or something like that. And because we want something that's got a mixture of speed and kind of like daily, kind of like, yeah, you see those around all the time in order to make our getaway. We're going to need a shaded lamp. Did you bring a shaded lamp? Okay, good. So it's obviously shaded so that you can adjust it so that the light doesn't sort of shine everywhere. We're going to need an auger. You guys know what an auger is? You know, like the thing you go to dig some. Okay, I'll explain why in just a second. 2 shovels, of course. We are going to need an iron bar which is curved and tapered at one end. Now in Essex, you might think at the time that this gentleman here may have used what's called a cant hook. You see this also in logging industries. It's basically a long pole with like this kind of curved hook on it. I'll explain what that's for in just a second. We're going to have rope. We're going to have canvas sling. We're going to have about 2 10x10 canvas tarps. Did you bring canvas tarps? Yes. Okay, good. And what are the last things that we need, ladies and gentlemen? Nerves of steel and a sociopathic lack of conscience. All right. All right. So the three of us, like we're going in our wagon, we're going to the graveyard. Okay, we're going to approach the graveyard with our accomplices in the conveyance. Make sure no one's around. You're going to park the wagon, and you're going to make sure that no one's like, can you like look out, like, be like, okay, yeah. Okay, so make sure, so you're on the lookout, okay? Everything's clear? Okay, that's good. Russ, you and I are going to go over. Okay, you went outside, okay, ready? All right, so you approach the grave. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Russ here is super excited. This is his first grave robbing. He really wants to do it. He's super into it. You got to stop though, because one of the things that's happening, you know, you've probably been to funerals. People leave flowers on the top, and particularly at the time in the early 19th century, people started to put decorations on the graves as well. And they were very particular about what those decorations looked like, either the shells or the stones or whatever, because they wanted to know, did someone steal the body? So the first thing we need to do is we look, here we are, nice grave. We make sure that if there are any stones or shells or something like that, we have to pick them up and basically place them over here and make sure that they're going to be in the exact same spot, because we have to put them exactly back where they were. Okay, so we've parked the wagon, we've located the grave, we've moved all the shells and the flowers and all that kind of stuff. What do we do next? Okay, so what I want you to do, Russ, you're going to spread one of the tarps on this side of the grave. Very good, excellent job, okay. We're going to spread the tarp on the other side of the grave. Okay, one is for the body, one is for the dirt, okay? One of the things you want to do is, as you dig this up, you do not want to leave any dirt on the ground or the grass. You do not want to have any evidence that this has been done. So what we're going to do, we're going to start digging quickly. He's got a shovel, I got a shovel. Here we go. Now, Russ, are we digging a 6x6, 6x3 or we call it 6x3 by 6 hole?
No.
No, that is correct. We are not. We are going to be digging a 3x3 by 6 inch hole. So we're only digging around the top part of the bottom, okay? Because it takes too long, and you know, we're doing this at night. You got the shaded lamp. It's going to take, so you're just digging like basically a square, and you're digging deep. Go, 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 go. You dig until you reach your coffin. When the top third of the coffin is exposed to air, what do we do next? This is where the auger comes in. You do not use a hatchet. You do not use the shovel. You do not want to make a lot of noise. An auger does not make a lot of noise. Basically, 1 hole, 2 hole, 3 hole, right on the top of the lid of the coffin, and then Russ is going to conveniently stomp on those holes. Give it a stomp. Nice, very good. Okay, smashing the lid of the coffin. Lift it up. Now it is our job to get the body out. I wanted to ask you, what does our client want? Do they want high quality or just sort of regular quality?
Anybody.
Okay, they just want any. they want regular quality. All right. The reason I am asking about that.
For another grave.
I talked about a canvas sling, and I talked about the cant hook. If you're looking for something that is just sort of regular flavor, we are going to use the cant hook. If you're looking for something that you want sort of more high quality, meaning that the face and the skull is still intact, we will use the straps. If we were to use the straps, what I would do is I would make my colleague Russ, he would have to reach into the grave after he's taken off the lid. He would take those straps, he would put it underneath the thorax of the corpse, and he would tie it around, and he would lift the body up from like under here. But fortunately, we do not have to use a high quality body. So what we're going to use is we're going to take the cant hook and shove it into the back of the skull and lift it up like that. Much faster. He's into it. Love it. All right. So we take the body. We now get it on the canvas tarp. Now, again, what we need to do is that we don't need rings, we don't need clothing, we don't need anything like that. Take the shroud that the body's in, throw it back into the coffin, put the lid back on, we cover it back up. We obviously take the dirt that has been in the canvas tarp and we totally cover it up, and so there's no dirt on the grass or whatever. We then replace all the flowers and shells and all that kind of stuff on the top. We wrap the body up and the tools in the canvas, and we go to our conveyance, go in the wagon, off we go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to my junior body snatchers here. So, that's how you do it. Okay. Most of the sources about Dr. Sewall, or at least this incident that I'm going to talk to you about Dr. Sewall, there's a little bit of reference, and there's some legal papers and some, what do you call it, sort of jurisprudence, kind of mass trial history, but not a ton. Most of it comes from a woman named Sally Andrews, Mady Pollies. Mady Pollies she was a member of the Essex Historical Society in about 1900, and she wrote kind of the first full account of the grave robbing of Chebacco Parish. And this is the story that she told. That Christmas Day of 1817, 26-year-old Sally Andrews. Can we turn the lights down? I think we're getting into like a spooky party. We're not gonna, Oh, awesome, thank you. There we go. Okay. So anyway, Christmas 1817, 26-year-old Sally Andrews died of consumption. She was a patient of Dr. Sewall's here. In the winter of 1818, her mom was grieving. She has these repeated nightmares that her daughter's coffin is empty. And she tells family members, she tells her friends, and finally one of her friends tells them back. She says, so one of the neighbors who lived near the old Essex graveyard said, that's weird, because I remember a couple months ago I saw lights in the graveyard and I thought I heard something. But also, I'm get a little weirded out here. So in the early spring, when the snow is melted, a villager is walking in the graveyard. And we don't know, it's lost to history exactly what was there, but it was either a barrette or a ribbon or a hair tie or something, but it was recognizable. And the last time anybody saw it was like on December 26th when Sally Andrews was in her coffin before they closed the lid and put it down. And now it's on the ground. So that freaks everybody out. And on Friday, April 17th, 1818, a group of villagers, including the pastor, Reverend Crowell, Sally Andrews' parents, Jacob and Sarah, the gravedigger, the sexton, they arrive at the graveyard and they dig up her grave, and they're trying to get to the proverbial bottom of the matter, of course, and they dig her up and there's nobody there. Coffin's empty. So they dig to the next coffin. That coffin is empty. They dig to the next coffin. That coffin is empty. And so on. So that night there's an impromptu village meeting. And the villagers appoint William Andrews, Thomas Choate, and Nathan Burton to head a committee to investigate the body snatching. They pledge a $500 reward, which is about $10,000 in today's money, to whoever will give any information on the atrocious villainy, so as to detect and to bring to justice either the traitors of this abominable traffic or the inhumane employers. So on April 25th, there was a local broadsheet that ran an advertisement of the award, and I will show it to you right here. So the 8 empty coffins, basically they basically tore up the graveyard. They dug a whole bunch of people up, and they found that there were 8 bodies missing. They took the 8 coffins and they displayed them on Main Street right by the graveyard. just like that. So, you know, Lady Polly's like Rob and the Grave. It's a great Gothic story. It's mostly true. She kind of fudges a little bit. I mean, a little bit of the like, I had a premonition and that I, you know, okay. I mean, I will say at the time, you know, graverobbing was a thing in the, you know, 1810s, 1820s. I mean, like this was a thing that was happening. And so people were kind of, it was very kind of top of mind of people. There was this sort of myth that they had waited till the snow melted. Actually, the weather was really mild. But anyway, regardless, this did happen. This is fact. There, as you can see, was a reward and all that kind of stuff. So, who are the missing? Let's kind of talk about them. Okay, so there was Samuel Burnham, who was age 26. He was the most recent death at March 5th. There was Mary Millett. She was age 35. She also died in March of 1818. Sally Andrews, the patient of Dr. Sewall. She died on Christmas Day, 1817. She was 26 as well. William Burnham, who died 2 days before. He was age 79. A guy named Elisha Story, who died of lethargy. I love all the sort of deaths back then, like Edward Gorey. Now, so Elisha Story was also a patient of Dr. Sewall's, and he had his estate had recently settled the doctor's outstanding bill for $11.62. Isaac Allen was another one. He died of an abscess. He was age 10. Philip Harlow, who was also age 10, he died in 1817 of a nervous fever. And the last one was a guy named Caesar Conway. And Caesar's very, very interesting. One, because Caesar actually died in 1811, so years before. So it's interesting that how he got up. And the thing that's even more interesting is that Caesar was a black enslaved African American. He was actually owned by the Choate family. He died in 1811 of consumption. He had actually been freed. He'd been owned by Francis Choate, Esquire, but he was freed in 1775 with the stipulation that he not become a financial burden on the Choate family. We don't know a lot about what he did in Essex for a job or what have you from 1775 to 1811, or exactly when his body was resurrected. Obviously, Dr. Sewall married a Choate. This is a former enslaved from a Choate family. You know, I also want to mention that the horrible thing is that enslaved African Americans, they were, you know, they were considered property, basically. So like their rights in terms of body snatching, they were just basically nil. It was pretty terrible. I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. But otherwise, of these 7 of the 8 on this list, they had all been interred between in the last 6 months of 1818. Now, does it take a Sherlock Holmes to find a prime suspect? Who is the local doctor who lives 500 feet northeast of the graveyard? Who teaches anatomy as a side gig? Who has a little man cave in the willow grove next to the graveyard, between the graveyard and his house, and had several patients die under his care and whose bodies are currently missing. Okay. So this committee gets formed, they're going to find out who's at the bottom of this. I don't think they spent a lot of time figuring out who was at the bottom of this. The morbid details have been lost to history. This is, again, like when I talk about how sort of like scandals, we turn back, we change the subject. But this is the kind of stuff that you wish you knew. It's because, like, okay, so there is this committee. They're going to find who stole the bodies. They go, obviously, to Dr. Sewall's house. And what we hear is that identifiable parts of 3 corpses, including Sally Andrews and William Burnham, were found. Now, according to the historian Dr. Waite, that I mentioned earlier, Dr. Sewall was supposedly caught red-handed with the body parts in that little man cave in the willow grove between his house and the graveyard. So, professional and personal disaster. Sewall's arrested. Choate family name, one of the first families of Essex. It is totally in the mud. And Reverend Crowell of Chebacco, he just rips both barrels. He writes this Jeremiah about like how terrible this crime is. Reverend Thurston of the First Parish Church in Manchester, was also chimed in on how terrible this was, and like they want to see the doctor punished to the fullest extent of the law. Now, why did Sewall get caught? And Dr. Waite mentions this. Sewall, it's that hair barrette. Sewall did not like it. That's just that one tiny little piece that was found, and it's identifiable to a corpse. This is why, you know, when you're working on any sort of your technique, you gotta strive for perfection. So the doctor's in desperate need of a competent attorney, and who did he hire? Well, he hired one of the best American legal minds of his, or frankly, any era, Daniel Webster. You guys know, like, the devil with Daniel Webster? It's that Daniel Webster, the former New Hampshire member of the House of Representatives, who's currently in private practice. He became Sewall's counsel. Now, there seems to have been some sort of family relationship, like the Sewall family and the Webster family somehow knew each other from northern New England. Anyway, he gets an introduction, he gets counsel. This is great. Now, unfortunately, Sewall had the issue of getting arrested around the time when the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court was scheduled to appear in Ipswich. Now, like back in those days, basically the court like traveled around different parts of the state and then it held like court cases. So like he gets busted on like April 18th or whatever it was. The court's in session April 28th. Bad timing for him. All right. So the grand jury produces one indictment against the doctor for receiving a human body. The next day, the justices, they bring in about 12 witnesses. There's plenty enough testimony to indict Dr. Sewall. So he's asked to, on May 2nd, the sheriff, a guy named Michael Brown, asks Dr. Sewall to appear in front of the Supreme Court in November to stand trial. Now, on June 23rd, the Reverend Robert Crowell, again, he's the pastor of Chebacco Parish, which, mind you, as all this is going on, Chebacco is like trying to petition the Mass legislature to become a town. So you can imagine, like, oh yeah, you're that town with the body snatching. Anyway, so Robert Crowell has this solemn interment ceremony with a lengthy sermon, and what they did is they actually took, they did a ceremonial reburying of the bodies. There were no bodies, but they did the ceremonial reburying of the coffins, and it's below where the hearse house is now. So if you go to Essex and you go on Main Street, you see the hearse house, the bodies are under there. Anyway, so it's June 23rd, it's a big, huge thing in the town. Of course, I always sort of wonder, well, did Dr. Sewall attend? Did he like, you know, like, because he lives like down the street. It's just so weird, because it's like, you know, here he is, he's like, total persona non grata. How is he making money? He lives like literally down the street. This is a tiny town of 1,200 people. Anyway, so let me get back to the trial a little bit. So Daniel Webster manages to get the initially written indictment thrown out, and it was because it was inaccurately drawn. Now, I'm not sure if the phrase inaccurately drawn refers to the legal phrasing or a sketch of a body part. I'm not sure, but anyway, so what the Solicitor General Davis does is he withdraws that, he puts in 2 additional accounts, one for basically each body identified as a person they found, Sally Andrews and William Burnham. Webster charges about $100 for Sewall's, for counsel, which is actually fairly cheap. It's only about $2,000 in today's money. I think lawyers have figured out that they could get away with charging a lot more in the last 30 years. But anyway, still, it's you know, this is a disaster for Sewall. Anyway, legal proceedings go on. I'm going to give this like sort of long story short. They get postponed, they go on, they get postponed. But basically, in November 1819, Dr. Sewall was found guilty. He was fined $800, $400 for each corpse. He was ordered to leave Massachusetts. And in January of 1820, they basically, the court, that's what this part is that basically the court paid, of the money that Sewall paid, the court paid $250 to attorney William Andrews Jr. for prosecuting the doctor. So this is the largest body snatching case in New England and in Massachusetts, and it was finally over. So Sewall skips town. But as I mentioned earlier, there's themes, like there are second acts in American life. So, you know, Sewall, all right, he's obviously had kind of a disastrous year and a half, but there's actually been some bright spots. One was the birth of his son Thomas, which happened to be the same day as his first criminal complaint hearing. So despite all the scandal and the moral reprobation and what have you, his wife still stayed with him. Some people still were friends with him, including he grew a tremendous relationship with the attorney Daniel Webster. And Daniel Webster said, "You know what, dude? Come to DC, man. Like, you start over. You can come to DC, you can get your job." So Dr. Sewall does. He and his wife leave Essex, and they move down to DC, and for this fresh start. And but he does one thing before the fresh start. So Dr. Sewall spends between 1820 and 1822. Now, what happens? Sewall gets arrested. He's like, obviously, people are upset because he's been stealing bodies, and they refuse to pay his bills. So he takes them to court. He takes his clients to court for failure to non-payment, and he wins. So, so for example, Sally Andrews' older brother Ebenezer, he sued him, and Dr. Sewall got over $200 worth of damages. Well, he was the judge said that he could be paid the $200. We have no idea if the court actually, or if people actually ever paid up or not. Anyways, but Sewall moves down to DC. Daniel Webster introduces him around to Washington society, and it totally pays off. So he became a prominent local physician and temperance activist. He ended up getting a job. He was actually one of the founding members of the medical school at what was called Columbian College, which is now known as George Washington University. He became a professor of anatomy, of course. And he actually became the chair of the department. Still maintained close relations with Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster's son Fletcher actually stayed with the Sewalls. Sewall gave the commencement speech at the medical school in 1827. In 1828, he joined the Methodist Church as a professor of religion. He became a big advocate for the political career of his brother-in-law Rufus Choate, and he became a personal physician to 3 U.S. presidents, and he finally didn't die until 1845 of tuberculosis. So if anyone ever had a second life, it was Dr. Sewall. So it was very sort of interesting about his second act. Is like, so when Robert Crowell, who again is the pastor of Essex, when he writes the history of Essex, he writes about Dr. Sewall, but doesn't mention the body snatching part. Because Dr. Sewall, by this point, was a nationally renowned doctor. One of the things that Dr. Sewall did is that he got very into temperance, and he published a series of lithographs on diseases of the liver for alcoholics, what have you. And this actually ended up being distributed in thousands of copies all over the United States. In fact, the state of New York actually required every household to have a set of these like diseased liver drawings to warn people off the dangers of drink. Anyway. So I just got some. I want to kind of get into some nits and some bits of the story that you may be thinking in the back of your head in terms of questions. Like one was, did anyone get the $500 reward posted by the Chebacco residents? We don't know. As far as we know, the bounty was never paid out. Did Sewall have any accomplices? We don't know. Theoretically, he could have taken the bodies by himself, but as you saw through the demonstration, it typically takes 3 people to do this quickly. It would have been physically difficult for him to do it by himself. There's probably a code of silence among resurrection men, so if he had an accomplice, we'll never know. Did he sell any bodies? We don't know. We don't think so. Maybe. Certainly, he was found with the parts of 2 corpses. There were no charges ever brought up that he sold bodies, but I do have to say that there were no remains ever found of the most recent dead, Mary Millett and Samuel Burnham, and they had just sort of disappeared. So it is theoretically possible he may have actually sold them. Yeah, exactly. Was he a member of the Spunkers Club? Again, we don't know. So he did attend Harvard Medical School. The Spunker Club was active during his time there. Theoretically possible. We don't know. At the very least, he probably knew about it if he didn't actually participate in it. What happened to the found remains? What we don't know, they're probably buried under the hearse house, but there's no sort of specific thing about what happened to those bodies. Do we know what happened to the snatched bodies' headstones? We don't. They were repeatedly smashed, and they may actually be under the hearse house now. So if we want to go crawling under the hearse house and find some stones, let me know. Do we know where the bodies were originally buried? We do not. So there are, in the graveyard now, there are about 450 stones, surviving stones, but there are records for over 2,200 bodies. So, like, a lot of bodies, not a lot of stones. I mean, not surprising, this graveyard has been in operation since 1660. Actually, a little, like, fun fact. So the Essex DPW and animal control officers had problems with groundhogs in the area. And we had some groundhogs that were kind of doing a little Dr. Sewall activity a couple of years ago. And they were bringing up bits. So we had to get them. No animals were harmed. We sent them away. It was all good. Anyway, okay. So I did want to also sort of mention about like what about the body market? Well, of course, the body market kind of shifts to New York. Like one of the things that obviously you got sort of local entrepreneurs digging up bodies. It's sort of bad press. So one of the things that schools like Harvard Medical School and stuff did, they shifted basically to the New York market. That's where they were getting kind of bodies in bulk. Again, a lot of them from the American South, from slaves. Nowadays, of course, we can will our bodies to science. So the alignment of supply and demand is a little better. But as you all know from the recent headlines, Harvard Medical School is still getting in trouble for spelunking and the mistreatment of bodies. All right, last bit, and I thank you all for your patience as I go through this story. Let me put it back to Sewall here because it's kind of interesting. Hold on. Okay, so what is the connection to Manchester, you are asking? Okay. Let me tell you, this is like total hot off the presses. You guys did not know this. This has not been part of like my previous blogs about this or presentations. Okay, in 1823, a guy named Tyler Parson published a book of trial testimony called Truth Espoused. Now, you can buy this on Amazon for about $44, but you don't need to buy it on Amazon. Just go with like Google Books has it for free. So if you want to read this, like go read it there. It's like the cross between a James Fenimore Cooper novel, like completely unreadable in like a polysyllabic way. But like if you get into it, you're like, oh my god, this is like a Twitter rant. This is like, wow, like what's going on with this? And anyway, so the work concerns a scandal that had recently concerned, that had occurred between the townsfolk of Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts, and their pastor, Reverend James Thurston, originally from Exeter, New Hampshire. And let me quote from you guys have a wonderful historian named Darius Francis Lamson, and this is what they have a brief sanitized reference to this scandal in the 1895 history of the town. The beginning of Mr. Thurston's pastorate seemed bright with promise. The large additions to the church and the interest in the new department of the Sunday school augured well for the future. But that day dawned, so bright was soon clouded, and Mr. Thurston's pastorate, on the whole, was a stormy one. An unfortunate cause of misunderstanding arose, criminations and recriminations followed, and witnessing angels sorrowfully turned their faces aside. The contention resulted in the dismissal of Mr. Thurston on July 9th, 1819. All right. So I'm going to tell you the dates, okay? All right. A little bit, I got some biographical information from the 1977 Manchester Cricket. It was an article written by a woman named Sally Gibson. This is apparently, her source was a thing called the Red Book. I don't know, maybe somebody like the archivist or you guys know what the Red Book is. Apparently like a Manchester Historical Society booklet you could buy at Allen's Pharmacy. I mean, it sounded kind of cool, actually. Okay. Anyway, so let me tell you a little bit about this James Thurston guy, okay? He's born 1769 in Exeter, New Hampshire. He's the son of Captain James and Mary Thurston, okay? He attends my alma mater, Phillips Exeter, but he doesn't go to college. His dad apparently wants him close to home, so he doesn't go off anywhere. He does work as a teacher in the 1790s in Exeter, and then eventually he does a little bit of a stint in Boston in business. By about 1800, though, he gets religion, and he comes back to Newmarket, New Hampshire, and he becomes a preacher. So he's ordained as a preacher, but what he's doing in the summers is that he works for the Piscataqua Missionary Society. So every 6 months of the year, he goes up to northern New England and Canada, and he preaches to Native Americans. He does this for about 3 years. In 1806, he marries, he starts a family, so okay, you get the theme, it's all good, he's just a young upstanding preacher. In 1808, though, he gets actually dismissed or laid off from his missionary society. But fortunately, Manchester is looking for a preacher, so there he goes. So he goes down to Manchester and starts his gig there in 1809. Oh, good. Okay, so the Manchester loans him loans him a plot of land. He gets, he builds on it, and it's actually now 45 School Street. One of the things that Thurston Genealogy, another book which was published in 1880, mentions that here again, his labors were crowned with remarkable success. All former disputes and animosities were settled. Peace, union, and harmony prevailed throughout the whole town, and the church was very much enlarged. So it sounds like Thurston's great. The church is kind of falling on its knees. Thurston comes down and sets everything to right. But then in 1814, Salem's Reverend William Bentley notes that Manchester's great zeal for its pastor seems to have cooled. And I'll tell you why. Okay, so in 1815, Thurston is the only reverend in town, and there's only one doctor in town, Dr. Graverobbing. Thurston and he don't get along. He wants to get rid of the doctor. In fact, one of the things he does is he writes a Dr. Dewey of Dartmouth Medical School up in Hanover, New Hampshire, and he tries to persuade Dr. Dewey to come down. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. Anyway, so this dust up between the pastor and the doctor is kind of disturbing a lot of the kind of, how would you say it, sort of the movers and shakers in the town, if you will. So in November 1815, a guy named Burley Smith of Smith's Point, is actually the farmer who owns Smith's Point, and a very, you've probably heard this name, Abigail Hooper Trask. Basically, they go to the Reverend Thurston's house, and they're saying to him, dude, you got to chill out. This fight between you and the doctor's got to end. This is just you're gonna get fired if you keep doing this. Now, you have to remember that in New England towns, specifically in Massachusetts towns in 1810, the church and the state are they're basically the same thing. So getting rid of your pastor, it's like an impeachment. And anyway, so they're telling so Smith and Hooper, they're like, dude, just chill out. He's like, and Reverend Thurston flips out, and he says, before I will knuckle to Dr. Grosvenor or any of these people, I will lose the last drop of my heart's blood. You are all a covetous, malicious, and Indian set of people. Damn. All right, so I think whoa, dropping some shade here, because all right, what do you remember? The Reverend had just served as a missionary to Native Americans, and here he is called the Europeans. I mean, it's sort of why are you using that phrase? And of course, everyone, the townsfolk of Manchester don't like being called, Indian or whatever. So that becomes, So he says this to Burley Smith and Abby Hooper, and of course, what do? They tell everybody else in town. Okay, now, so Smith is basically going off our pastor is completely unhinged. Now, what's interesting about it is that the pastor's kind of going, he's having a hard time, okay? And as often happens when people have hard times, perhaps they need a little kind of medicinal pick-me-up. But the thing is that who's running the liquor store in town? It's Abby Hooper. So she starts keeping track of how much booze he's drinking. Okay. December 7th, he bought 3 pints of rum. December 11th, he's bought brandy, and so she's this guy's hitting the bottle. Anyway, so this kind of goes on. In June 1819, there's a big HR moment for the Reverend Thurston. Basically, he hears about the part of his congregation are going to file charges against him. They're going to basically get him impeached. So the first thing that he tries to do is he tries to call a special, Russell will preach this, he tries to call a special town meeting and pack his own committee to dismiss him of the charges. Of course, the people hear about this and they completely freak out. Now, what's the fighting about? The fighting about, obviously, is his salary. Thurston's complaining he's not getting paid enough. The people are complaining that his conduct has been such as to destroy his usefulness as a teacher of piety, morality, and virtue. Specifically that he stole a bunch of shingles from the Manchester schoolhouse. I don't know, this is absurd. In an ungentlemanlike and unchristian-like manner. Which is like, I'm like, okay, is there a gentlemanlike and Christian-like manner to steal shingles? Huh? Anyway, all right, but that's not the way, because they're upset about him wanting to kick out the doctor and bring his new doctor. But it wasn't so much that as the manner of the sales pitch, and I will get into that. Okay, so back in 1815, Reverend Thurston, he's trying to convince Dr. Dewey of Hanover, New Hampshire, to come and basically, move down to Manchester to be the town doctor. He states in a letter to the doctor that Manchester was as fine a place as any for private dissection, as there was not the least bit difficulty for obtaining subjects there. All right, so Dr. Dewey mentions this rather unorthodox, benefit, HR benefit or something, to his colleague, Dr. William Mussey, who happens to be a friend of Dr. Sewall. That guy. So in a November 18th, 1818 letter, Dr. Mussey writes, "It did strike me with surprise, as it did to Dr. Dewey, that a gentleman should offer to one physician the facility of obtaining and dissecting dead bodies as an inducement for him to settle in his parish, and persecute another physician with unremitted zeal for the same thing." All right, so the Manchester town elders, they fired Thurston. They're like, you know what, you're out of here. You're no longer pastor. You know what, fine, we'll buy you out of the house. We gave you the land, we built the house, we'll buy you out of the house. Thurston says, no, I'm not leaving. And he doesn't. So anyway, so Thurston, of course, in desperate need of an attorney, who does he go to? Well, he goes to Leverett Staltonstall, and then you probably, you've all heard of the Staltonstall name around here. But who else? Attorney Daniel Webster. So I just get this sort of sense that Daniel Webster, he was like the Morgan and Morgan of his time. Having troubles with your village? Call Daniel Webster. Anyway, so Thurston brings the town of Manchester to court, go to trial, and he wins. He gets $1,500 in damages. Tyler Parsons, who's named in the suit, he responds with this book, Truth Espoused, which you can get on Google Books, or you can go and get on Amazon Books, which again is just Tyler's like, it's so great. Anyway, so what happens is that Thurston does he gets out of here. It doesn't work out. He goes back to Exeter. He does not have a good second act in his life. He teaches to quote unquote destitute parishes until his death in 1835. But the last thing I want to leave you with, so now that you know all this, particularly the story of Dr. Sewall and its curious connection to Manchester, I want to suggest to you all that you might want to ask, who's your town administrator, Greg Fetterspiel? Yes. All right, so please ask Greg Fetterspiel, or the DPW, and got a town meeting coming up, for funds to do a ground-penetrating radar survey at your Old North Graverobbing. Because I think you may be surprised at what you find and what you don't find. Thank you all very much. I can stay for questions if anyone's got questions. Yes, you back.
Just kind of curious, just the time period at that time. I just finished a book. It's called Body by Bill Bryson. And one of the sections here was one of the bigger things, and just for medical studies, was Gray's Anatomy, like the first edition. And he writes about the efficacy of how people do anatomy and stuff like that even to this day. But do you have, does anyone here, or do you have any idea, like, when was that first published?
Gray's Anatomy, it's funny, because when I went to art school, we actually used to study it. I think he was,
By the way, the artist was the real star of that book.
yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say like 19th century? It is the mid-19th century?
Yeah.
I mean, Da Vinci was digging up bodies and doing animal studies at the time. I mean, the thing is that I guess that you can only study so many pictures. It's you really got to get you got to get your hands in the thorax, if you will.
Well, it's still used today. I mean, it should not be improved.
Yep, that is a great quote. Yes, go ahead.
Can you speak to the Booth family plot in Rosedale Cemetery?
I cannot speak to it, but I'd love to do a blog post on it. Yes, go ahead.
I think you mentioned that Sewall was the town treasurer,
Yes, he was the treasurer of the Second Parish Church.
and it's the treasurer who's directed to make the reparations payments of $250.
That's a very good question. This is this sort of thing that like the smile nervously and change the subject thing. Is like I sort of like love like okay, he gets arrested and like what does the parish do? Well, I guess like we're gonna let everyone vote for a new treasurer. You know what I mean? I don't know how that worked, but somehow that did. He was basically kicked out of the church.
I just love the irony of it.
It's incredibly ironic. I know. Yes, the back of the band. You, yes, yeah, you. Yeah.
It's very interesting that Dr. Sewall started at Georgetown University in Portugal.
Yep.
For doctor, and I had surgery with him years ago. And the first thing they asked me was, did he know that I was going to be missing something on the afterwards, if I would be willing to give my part to, decide and be your students. I believe in doing it because I have learned the best way.
Yep.
And so I signed for it.
That's great.
And it was, my husband has signed to give his body away to science. And I wonder if that was originally done because of a religious reason.
Well, yeah, it was definitely not done for religious reasons, and then I think as the 19th century progressed and people recognized the value of science, scientific inquiry, it became more acceptable to donate your body to science. Yes?
I'm curious about the Spunker Club.
Yes.
So that was something illegal, but it was okay to have a club about it?
Well, I mean, I don't think he was sort of listed on Harvard's like list of official clubs in your academic book. But it was definitely a club of sorts, and it existed, and it's very well documented.
What's your overall opinion? I mean, you say we don't know. I mean, do you think Sewall is basically doing this to advance? I mean, it sounds to me like for sure to just advance science and medical science.
Oh, it's a great question. I mean,
What's your opinion?
I mean, it's so hard to know. I mean, we don't have any evidence that he sold bodies. I do think we have an indication that he was a very good doctor and was very dedicated to the practice of medicine. I do think that he probably used most, if not all, of the bodies. And I think it was in an effort to advance his knowledge. Yes?
I'm reminded of a tour I took in Edinburgh, and it's been years now, so I can't remember the exact details, but there was a very famous duo in Edinburgh right around the same time.
Yes, that's a great story.
And, yeah.
Yes, oh my God.
And they actually went on
They
this
murdered people.
horrid spree where
Yeah.
they killed 16 people, whether they were like drunk in the street or whatever. They actually killed them for the purpose of having them buried so that they could snatch their bodies and get money so that they could. I'm just kind of wondering whether anyone has delved into this doctor up here. It seems like a lot of the bodies that you listed were extremely young, and although, medicine was terrible back then in terms of, consumption or whatever, you just died, they could, whatever. But is there any suspicion at all about whether he was actually maybe killing these people?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I know that sounds sinister, but I mean, if
I don't think
by
like,
other doctors.
I don't think anyone's done like a statistical survey of say like Essex deaths, you know, from 1800 to 1820. Like, do we see a spike under Dr. Sewall or something like that? I will say that, yeah, I mean, people just died a lot for a lot of reasons.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, but it seems like in that few months, there were a lot of 20-somethings.
Yeah, there were. I mean,
that died, like just suddenly died, and suddenly had their bodies dug up.
to have a 26-year-old die of consumption is crazy. To have a 10-year-old die of like refugees.
Yeah.
Russ, go ahead.
Rob, that begs the question, was there more money in it when they were fresh?
This is an example of this. The economics of body snatching have been kind of lost to history. I know, like, as I mentioned, like, I was able to find like an 1840 body cost about $25. We knew that for your basic kind of medical students, they didn't need a particular, like, I need a cancer patient, or I need a, you know. But we don't know much about the economics of, like, because yes, basically the professor of anatomy at Harvard would be like, I need this, this, and this, and go farm out people to get it from. Yes, go ahead.
Were the bodies embalmed?
There was no embalming didn't become popular until about the Civil War. Embalming, particularly because when embalmers really took off when they were embalming bodies of soldiers killed in the South and then bringing them back north. So prior to then, there was no embalming.
So those bodies weren't preserved in any way? They were
No, that's why it was like you couldn't dig them out after 72 hours in July. Why you had to be mindful of the weather. In fact, actually, at the Hearst House nowadays, they actually have a coffin. It's kind of a temporary coffin, and it's zinc lined. And you would use it as if you died in the summer, they put you in it and put you in it with ice, so that like you could, then buy your fancy coffin or wait for your funeral or whatever. So the methods of preserving were much more rudimentary than later in the 19th century. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I do know that this paucity of teaching material has been a problem for hundreds of years.
Yep.
In Padua, in northeastern Italy, there is a stunning anatomy theatre, and it's a very steeply tiered, standing only mini stadium around a table at which dissections were performed for the benefit of the students, and it presages the Etherdome at Mass General Hospital, which has a very similar on a large scale.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. You'd have the professor here, and there'd be this big, thing. Yeah. But the thing is that if you're now I dissect the perineum, you know what I mean? Like you yourself aren't actually doing that. You're just watching someone 40 feet away, 2 flights up doing it. So this is why having that hands-on practice is so necessary. Yes.
Did you do any research into their children? These are chokes, really.
Yep.
Did their children or this family ever return to this small town of Essex where they basically did this injury against their neighbors and their friends?
It's a great question, and I know that they did have children. The children did have children. Like if you go to Ancestry.com, you can find, in the DC area as children and grandchildren and stuff, but I have no idea if they ever came back. Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, again, what happened to all these family relations?
Yeah.
They stopped sending Christmas cards? Yes, the back.
I know.
Our house is where we live. And so Rufus grew up there, the family stayed there. It's just the daughter went with him to Washington. Stayed on his family, but in fact, it stayed in the Choke family until the 70s.
Is it the 1970s or the 70s?
1970s. And then just went back and forth between David and Rufus, because when I look at something, I have to be very careful because I use the same name over and over.
Yes.
I find there's an argument. I find there's an argument about these are people who are just trying to advance science. That's what I do.
Yeah.
Well, and profit. I mean, I'm here in biotech, whoever invented bring that in or whatever, they're making money.
Yes, go ahead. Question.
Recent case of Harvard,
Yes, that is correct. So one of the things that's happening now, and that Harvard got wrapped up in controversy, is that medical schools have bodies. People donate their bodies to science and all that kind of stuff. But there are still people that there's almost a gray market if people want to have skulls for their mantelpiece or a femur or something like that. So, no, I'm totally serious. So the Harvard head mortician or whatever was basically getting orders for bits, and he was selling them, and he got caught. Yes.
But I mean, again, I'm not a medical background or anything like that, but the stuff I've read is there's huge protocol around anatomy and this type of stuff in terms of respect for the deceased, this and that. I think that a professional, it's done the right way.
You'd hope so. You'd hope so. Yes. So in the 19th century, you see in the late 1900s, early 20th century, you do see pictures of doctors in their paper collars or students, and they're you'll see a sign saying "He died for us," and they're formally posed around a corpse. But you also see pictures of medical students joking with the dead bodies. So you never know. Yes, go ahead.
On my driver's license, I checked the box for I'm all for it.